everyone, I'm Jacqueline Rogers. I'm founder of Oath Pure Body Care, and I just wanted to bring you into our home and explain a little bit more about the wonders of kombucha. You may or may not have drank kombucha before, you may brew it at home, and you may just really be interested in what the heck it is. So kombucha is ultimately a fermented tea. That's the simplest way I can explain it. It is simply sugar and tea and water, and there's a particular ratio. It makes a sweet tea, and then what you do with that is you add what we call a SCOBY, and a SCOBY are one of these guys in here. So a SCOBY stands for, it's kind of an acronym, it stands for a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, and it's alive and it's living, and the bacteria and the yeast essentially eat the sugar, the caffeine, break it down, and what they expel is CO2, makes the bubbly, kind of frizzanty taste that you get when you drink kombucha, as well as a low amount of alcohol. So some people are concerned about alcohol content in kombucha. It's very, very low, and you can certainly read up more on that, and I'll give you a couple of references at the end of this as well. So what I thought I would do was kind of give you the lowdown of what we do at home. So we do what's called a continuous brew. So we have this big guy here. We actually have two of them, and it has a little spout or spigot on the front, and it allows us to simply turn it on and take out and drink straight from it, or make a full batch, drain the full batch, and then top it up. And what you see is all of these layers of SCOBY forming. So each layer is actually a batch. So the magic of the SCOBY is that every time you top it up, it creates a new layer, and that helps to prevent evaporation and mold and like bad bacteria from getting into your brew. So to keep things simple, I wanted to show you what you do when you've got too many, and you can also do what's called, so this is continual brew, and then you can do a single batch brew where you just have a container and you dump it out, clean it out every single time you make sweet tea. So what I was going to do is just show you, you want to wash your hands with soap thoroughly, but not antibacterial soap, because antibacterial kills bacteria good and bad. So we want to keep these guys healthy and happy, and honestly, it's totally fine for your hands. You can just go in, your hands will feel really soft and supple. These guys have been sitting for a long time, so they're pretty acidic, but not as acidic as say apple cider vinegar would be. You can also make a kombucha vinegar, and that is something you can read up on as well. Again, I'll give you some links to that. So ideally, when you start a new batch of kombucha, whether it's this big or just small, you can start out really small. You want to make sure that your jar is clean, usually with really hot water. You can also use just white vinegar to clean it out. So you don't want any residue, you don't want any soap. So what you can see in this is kind of like, it's kind of scuzzy, but all that darkness is yeast. And so it's accumulated over all of these brews, and it tends to sink to the bottom, and you don't really want that in your new batch. So what I have here, and you can see it's very clear. So this is stuff I've siphoned off of another batch, and it's been sitting, and it's very acidic, and you really wouldn't enjoy drinking it straight up. It's really great actually to mix in with, if you're making a vinaigrette for salad, a pasta, you can just take a shot of it in the morning. It really helps with digestion as well, or after a meal. So that's something you can do. You can add more sugar to feed it. And again, I'll give you some resources for that. But you can see on the top, there's these baby SCOBYs that are forming. And so they'll kind of sink to the bottom. I'm not going to disturb it too much because the yeast has settled, and ideally for when I'm making my new batch, I want it to just be as clear as possible. It just helps everything to create a balance when it's going to be brewed. So for my guy, it's quite a big vessel. So I have a really big container to mix my sweet tea in. So in terms of supplies, you want to have the vessel you're going to brew in. You want to have your bowl to make the sweet tea in if it's going into a different vessel. You need to have tea and sugar. So what kind of tea? Essentially, I found starting with a black tea was the best. In this case, this is a pu'er tea, which means it's slightly fermented tea. And there's a whole rhetoric on teas as well. You can use green tea, you can use more rich and bold black tea, but I would highly suggest using an organic tea, nothing that's flavored, no additives. The nice thing about kombucha brewing at home is that you have the choice. You can choose what teas you want to use, and after a few brews, you don't really love it, you can change it up, and that's what gives it the nice, I don't know, that personal touch, right? So when you brew something like this at home, you get to choose where your ingredients are coming from. For sugar, I just stick to organic cane sugar, plain and simple. It's not super refined. They sell it in bulk at a number of stores. Same with teas. You can get them loose leaf, you can get them online, or if you have a local tea supplier that you frequent already. But I really highly recommend organic so that you know that it's not been sprayed, ideally free from any of the contaminants that you want to put into your brew. So what we'll do is, for mine, I make 12 cups of sweet tea. So for me, the ratio is 1.5 tablespoons of loose leaf tea to 3/4 of a cup of sugar. So what I do is essentially, I take a strainer, sorry, I'll just grab that for you. So I take a strainer, a really fine mesh strainer. You can also use a cotton strainer, and you just add the tea in there, making sure not to get it into the brew. I boil my water and I put it on for 5 minutes. That's the amount of time I found is really good for my tea. If you're doing a green tea, you probably don't want boiling water because you will find that the leaves will get bitter. Green tea is a lot more delicate than black, so less heat will yield a less bitter tea, which is also something that when people are drinking tea just straight up, they find they don't like green tea. Well, it probably is because it's been brewing for too long, and it's probably with boiling water, because that's kind of what's standard, especially at tea shops or coffee shops across the board, is it's typically just boiling water. There's a select few that offer a different temperature. So I just kind of let that sit in there and try to stir it around once or twice in the 5 minutes, but otherwise I just kind of let it sit. And then what I do is I will top this up with water. Now, water is another key ingredient in brewing kombucha. So ideally you don't want chlorine, and if you're in the city and you know that your water's treated and you're not sure what to do, you can purchase some spring water.
You can also take your tap water and let it sit overnight so that the chlorine evaporates from it. You can use distilled water, you can use reverse osmosis water, and that's what we use at home.
I actually use reverse osmosis water, so distilled water could probably work fine. You just don't want contaminants like fluoride and other things that are in your water supply, especially in the main cities. So we are actually on well water here, so it goes through a few treatments before it comes out of our tap. And yeah, so I'll top this up, and then what I'll do is I'll come back and show you what I do in order to get this guy going, adding the sugar and everything. Talking a little bit about temperature. So supplies I went over. You need your guys. Definitely one of these that has a small hole. This one is great because the holes are really tiny, and even if you get to the bottom of your loose leaf tea, you'll find that it doesn't really escape out of that, because you don't really want any contaminants in your brew. So 3 more minutes on the steep, and then I'll show you how everything comes together. Okay, so my tea is steeped, and it's a nice dark rich color. And while the tea is still hot, this is when you want to add your sugar. So you can pour this guy in and give it a good stir, and you want it to completely dissolve. And when you're using utensils to make kombucha, I highly recommend glass anywhere that you can. A lot of different plastics have a lot of different properties, and some of them leach chemicals, and you don't want any of that into your brew. So it depends again on what vessels you have at home to make your sweet tea in. It's okay for a short period of time, but I really wouldn't suggest hot liquids in plastic and any fermentation in plastic for long periods of time. PP number 5, polypropylene, is the most safe plastic in terms of leaching. It doesn't leach a lot of chemicals. That's been studied and over various groups over a course of time, but for our sake, we keep with a stainless steel spigot as well. So this guy, the top part that comes out is stainless steel, so it won't corrode, it won't erode, it doesn't discolor, and then inside there's actually, I believe it's like a silicone kind of rubbery seal so that it doesn't leak either. So once it's all dissolved, what you want to do is you want to top up the sweet tea, it's really sweet right now, with water. So in my case, it's to the 12 cup mark, and I'll give you a breakdown of ratios as well. There's also lots of resources online, but this will be really hot right now. It's quite hot because I put boiling water in. And once we add the remainder, so this is about 2 cups, 2 and a bit cups of sweet tea. Once you add 10 more cups of cool water, it brings it to a really good temperature for the brew. And this particular guy likes to sit and brew 26, 27 degrees. That's like the optimal temperature where everything is happy. The bacteria and the yeast, they're thriving, they're able to digest and break down the sugars, and you'll get the best flavor profile. A little bit too hot might be a bit too acidic, too vinegary for you, and a little bit too low, it'll be too sweet, and it won't have that kind of power, that warmth that the bacteria need to thrive. So I'll top this up and then come back and explain how everything goes. All right, so here we are. We have our sweet tea topped up. It's at its perfect ratio. And now what we need to do is we just need one of these scobies. There's a lot. And so some of them are older and they come in different shapes and sizes. So some are really thick, some form really thin. Also depends on the temperature that it's being brewed at. So I like to kind of choose one of them kind of in the middle that's a little less brown, which means the brown is just the yeast. And so you really only need one of these guys. It doesn't need to be huge. Bigger isn't necessarily better. And some of them blow holes. So you'll find that you'll have a huge hole in one, like this one is a bit thin in one spot. That's totally normal. Every batch has its own personality. And that's the nice thing too about making this at home, is that you get to infuse a bit of your own energy and your own magic into the brew. So you want to be in a good headspace. You don't want to be stressed out. You don't want to have kids yelling. Kids can help. Our daughter Adelaide, she's left the house for now, but if she were here, she'd definitely want to be stirring the sugar, eating the sugar, and topping up the brew. And she really loves to do the second fermentation. And I'll do that in a second kind of excerpt to this, just because I'm going to give this guy time to brew. So all we do is you're going to add into the clean vessel, and I just rinse the vessel out with water. And so it doesn't look like very much, and sometimes I'll do 16 cups, but I don't want this to take too long to ferment. The typical fermentation time, once you've got everything together and sitting and resting, is 7 to 10 days. On average, it's 7 days. But when you're starting kind of from scratch like this, sometimes I find it takes a couple of weeks, and it can take on your first batch as much as 1 month, just to get everything used to its new conditions. You're likely getting a SCOBY from somebody or purchasing it online through a culture's website, and it doesn't necessarily have the same sugar, the same tea, the same water, the same conditions, and the same energy. So it's going to take some time for the bacteria and yeast in the SCOBY to adjust, and that's okay. So just be patient, and after about a week, you can start kind of tasting it. So in my case, I can just tap the spigot and give it a little taste. It shouldn't taste too sweet. It's not ready. And if you've let it go too long where it tastes really, really sour, don't worry, you can always add 1 more cup of sweet tea in the ratios, just a smaller amount, top it up, give it a day and taste it. Maybe it needs 2 or 3 days. So with this guy, because I want it to ferment rather quickly, I have a very strong brew. So this is an old brew that came out of the same batch. And if you could smell it, it smells kind of like vinegar. And I'm gonna put the majority of this in. Usually you need about 1 cup of what they call starter liquid. And that's just kind of like the magic of the brew that the SCOBY came from. So I just pour in, I'll probably pour in actually most of this, because a really strong starter liquid will really kickstart this brew and get everything going. So once all the yeast starts to come out, I'll just stop. There's nothing wrong with the yeast, it'll just set the balance of the brew off. So once I've set that in, putting in something acidic also helps to kind of neutralize any of the other bacteria, kind of like, almost like caps it, so that nothing funky wants to grow in there. And then what we'll do is it does need to breathe because it is going to be releasing CO2. The SCOBY that forms will kind of shield that and it kind of holds it in. So once this is brewed, it comes out slightly frizzante, and frizzante means just with little bubbles, and it'll have like a really nice mouth feel. And then you just cover it up with a clean cloth that is tight woven because you don't want any fruit flies to get in or any bugs, and just secure it with an elastic band. I mean, there are some great products on the market if you want to get high tech. We just use what we have, and feel free to do the same. And then what we'll do is just set this aside. So ideally not in a sunny location. I have a corner in our kitchen where I sit it on actually a cork mat because our countertops are quite cold and I feel like it changes the temperature of the brew. And then I'll show you on our other one. It's actually a fish tank sticker, and I hope you can see that. And I just stuck it to the bottle, and it really just reads the temperature of the brew. So it helps you to gauge what temperature your brew is at. You can get one for each. I just had one and I keep them in the same spot, so they're usually in and around the same temperature. And 27 is the ideal. And so in the winter, being in Canada, it gets kind of cooler in the house. So you can purchase like a warming blanket or like a warming mat that goes around the vessel. Or I purchased like a seed starting mat and just kind of I weave it between the two. And that provides just enough heat to keep everything a little bit warmer than the air in this particular spot that it's fermenting. With that being said, I will come back on and show you how I tap it and do a second ferment. So what that means, you can drink it straight out of this once it's ready, once it reaches the desired taste that you want. If you want to get technical, you can get pH strips. I started with that just to kind of understand where the brew lies. But honestly, taste and smell and sight are the best that you can do. Just kind of go with your senses. So I'll leave this guy to sit and then I'll come back in about a week or so and explain how everything turned out. And I'll show you the progression of from the one SCOBY to what's formed on the top and the steps that we do in a second ferment. And what a second ferment means is that you're taking the kombucha that you've brewed and you'll probably tap it maybe a day sooner than you otherwise would to drink it, or put it in the fridge because it will continue to ferment at room temperature. So putting it in the fridge halts or stops that fermentation. So to make a second ferment, you tap it a little bit sweeter and then you add in flavorings. Flavorings are like a real fruit. We use frozen raspberries, you can use mangoes, anything that's in season right now. You can do savory options, you can get spicy. So honestly, the world is your oyster in terms of what you're going to flavor your brew with. You might just want to get used to drinking it straight up and see how you like that. And I'll explain some of our favorite additions when we top this guy up for a second ferment. So we'll see you soon. Hey everyone, here we are back with our kombucha. This is the guy that we topped up on the 1st of September. It is now the 14th of September. It's taken a little bit longer. As I mentioned, it might take a bit longer when we clear out the whole container and start from scratch versus just tapping it down and topping it back up. So I found that also with the change in the temperature, so it's not midsummer anymore, we're approaching fall, cooler weather inside our home has cooled down a little bit as well. So I found myself needing to put a heating mat between our two batch brews. That brought the temperature up because as you can see, this is my little guy that tells me what the inside liquid temperature of the glass vessel is. And it was hovering about 25, 26. So I turned on my heat to bring it up that 1 or 2 degrees every now and again. And I think with the up and down temperature, the kombucha wasn't as happy, but alas, it's okay. It's a little bit on the sweet side, but that's okay because what we're gonna do is take this and you can see That's the mother, we call the mother. That's the SCOBY that we put in a week ago or a week and a half ago. And this is the new guy that's formed on the top. And there's small bubbles that have formed underneath and they're kind of trapped there. So that creates a slight bubble in the actual kombucha when you drain it. So we upcycle a lot of bottles. These are old kombucha bottles. We have old wine bottles. We have old elixir bottles. And as long as they are cleaned out really, really well, they're perfect for reusing over and over again. The only thing you might find is over time your lids will kind of go off. You can repurpose lids from other bottles and put them right on here if you need to. So all we do in this case is I actually stir it up a little bit. So in the bottom, I'll see if you can see that a bit better. There's a lot of growth going on. That's the yeast on the bottom, and I like to stir it up a bit to get some of the yeast into the bottle so that it helps to digest the next fruit or spice that we're going to put in. So I'll show you an example of one of these bottles, and you can see it going down as I fill this guy up, and I leave about an inch of space at the top, and you want a little bit less space once you finally cap it. And I have a different variety of options for flavorings. So our classic go-to in our house is raspberries, and these look kind of macerated. They've been frozen, and I just took them out of the freezer. You can put them straight in frozen, and over time they will just create that second ferment. So in terms of this is about a 16 ounce or 480 ml bottle, and you can put in about a tablespoon to 2 tablespoons of fruits. I just kind of go by feel. They actually have recommendations for how much of the flavoring to how much kombucha you have. You can just play with it, and that's the great part again, it's really organic and you just go with your gut. So I can top up that, but more interestingly, we have some really nice mint growing right now in our garden, and so I thought I would take some of the spearmint combined with some of the peppermint and just chop it up finely. And I've never actually done this flavor before, so I'm kind of excited to see how it turns out. So really, you just want to break it up so that the natural essences and essential oils and properties of the herb are infused, and then you literally just stick it in and just have clean hands. You don't have to go crazy. And then I'm gonna do an apple mint. So I thought apples right now are perfect. These are from a local farm and completely organic as well. So you just dice them up, and then what happens is during the course of the fermentation, the second fermentation in this bottle, the actual herbs and fruits get a crazy flavor profile to them. And you can totally eat them as well. You can eat the fermented fruits, and if that's not your thing, you can also just compost them. You can also bake them, so you can use them in baked goods like even pancakes or muffins. So I top this up. I like less headspace because I find it keeps the bubbles in more, but you definitely want a little bit in there. And when I cap it, another key thing to have around is this is like a China marker, so it's just like a grease pencil, and you can write on the bottle, or if you have a little piece of tape that you want to put on every time, that's fine too. And I usually put the type of flavoring that it is and the date. So I'll write that right on the bottle. And then what happens is these guys go and sit in kind of just a quiet spot in your kitchen, out of direct sunlight. Again, our counters are cool, so I always put them on a board or a cork, and then check them. Again, if your house is on a moderate temperature, then it won't be more than maybe 2 days, but after 3 days, you definitely don't want to leave these guys because the pressure will build, and if you don't have a really strong glass bottle, you need to be super careful because it can explode on you. One way to test it is to just do the top a little bit, and it's called burping, and you just literally are burping the bottle, and you'll know that it's ready because the bubbles will start coming fierce and they'll come from the bottom. All this fruit will sink to the bottom as well. So that's all we do is we top it up and flavor it. Another favorite of ours is ginger. So do get organic ginger. You don't want it to be sprayed or washed with anything. And then you can just slice it up really finely. You can even grate it if you want it to be really strong. I leave the skin on. We just cut them up in dices, and with this one I'm actually going to do a ginger and bee pollen, which I've also never done. We do ginger a lot, but bee pollen is beautiful. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's part of the properties of the hive, essentially. And my beautiful friend Carly from Yatui, who makes wonderful intention candles, gifted this to me a while ago, and it is phenomenal. It's full of lots of energy, positive energy, helps you focus. And so what I would do is just put about, I don't know, half a tablespoon or so in this much kombucha. And again, you just kind of tap it and top it up, close the lid and label it and put it to the side. So there's not too much involved at this stage of the game. And then you just want to make sure when you're done, either you're drinking it straight away 2 or 3 days later, or putting it in the fridge. And if you're not going to drink it within about a week, I highly recommend straining this fruit out. So you just grab a strainer, pour the kombucha through into a clear, ideally like a spouted measuring cup, and pour it back in your bottle, top it up, and stick it back in your fridge. If it does not have enough fizz for your liking, you can just leave it on the counter for another day, and it will continue to ferment. That's why we always put our finished kombucha into the fridge to stop the fermentation. I mean, it slowly ferments, but it halts it for the most part, and you're going to consume it probably within 3 or 4 weeks at the most anyways. And if you're like us, it's gone within a week. So I wish you all the best in your endeavor to brew your own kombucha at home. Feel free to get in touch with any other questions. Again, this is just something that we love to do at home, and we have more and more of these. Oh, I wanted to show you one more thing. If you're wondering what I did with all of those scobies that I took out of here last time, they are here, and this is a SCOBY hotel. It looks kind of gross and grotesque, actually perfect for Halloween. And this is a hotel of all the older SCOBYs. And I do stuff with these, but that might be a show for another day. You can make something called SCOBY fruit leather. It's basically like a healthy, amped up version of fruit roll-ups, like the classic thing I remember as a kid anyways. That's horrible and disgusting in my mind now, but definitely something that you can do. You can cook, you can even eat them straight up, but I suggest if you're gonna do that, try a very little piece. It just, if you've never had it, your stomach might be in a bit of like good shock, and it might not be expecting all of the probiotic hit that you will give it. So always start with anything that you're doing new, small. And again, if you've never had kombucha before, I highly suggest just, taking even an ounce or 2 ounces of it and seeing how you feel. Just sit with it. And if you're having a good reaction and things are going well and your body's enjoying that, then continue. And then we often drink one whole one of these a day, or sometimes a little bit more. But again, you kind of have to work up to that with any new regime, with anything new you're putting into your body as well. You don't want to set off the current balance that you're in. And if you're going through some changes health-wise, or if you're changing up your diet, you just want to start things in small increments and go from there. So I hope you found this helpful, and I look forward to seeing you again.